I killed so many women I have a hard time keeping them straight. My plan was to kill as many women as possible. I picked prostitutes because they were easy to pick up and no one would notice them. This quote is by Gary Ridgewood, also known as the Green River Killer. This is his picture. Gary was a normal-looking 9-to-5 factory worker for over 30 years. In his spare time, without anyone noticing, he managed to kill over 49 women who were all prostitutes. The police and law enforcement's callous attitude towards sex workers and the hateful stigma that society as a whole places on this marginalized group of people causes hundreds upon thousands of murders to go undiscovered and also unpunished. Today, I will explain how the criminalization of prostitution has had a negative impact on our society. The effects of prostitution are felt all around us. In Monroe County, there are 151 massage parlors that are thought to be prostitution brothels, according to an article printed in the Pocono Record titled Pocono Sex Trade Flourishes by Beth Breschel. According to that same article, these are easy to spot due to covered windows and no worker cars in the parking lot. This is usually a sign of trafficking. I will be discussing three main points. The first is how criminalization of prostitution leads to the empowerment of criminal organizations. The second is that treatment of sex workers is a human rights issue. And lastly, that the decriminalization of prostitution has been beneficial in other countries and what we can do about it. But first, we need to understand how illegal prostitution empowers criminal organizations. Due to large-scale production project of the Hoover Dam, the Las Vegas population grew from 5,000 to 25,000, which led way to large-scale entertainment and eventually the first casinos. The mob was able to accumulate millions of dollars through illegal prostitution rings, which gave them the ability to muscle control over the Las Vegas casinos, according to an article written by Nelson Graber entitled Tourism and Prostitution. In 1948, brothels became legal in the state of Nevada. According to Graber, this had a crippling effect on the mob's ability to make money and resulted in them losing control over the casinos. Without government regulation, sex workers is often controlled by the most heinous of criminals. Street workers are often controlled by pimps, who are individuals who usually dominate and force sex workers to work for little or no pay. A common practice for a pimp is to get a young girl addicted to drugs in order to maintain her dependence on him. This leads to empowerment of pimps and drug dealers as well. There are some scholars who disagree with prostitution under any circumstances. Kathleen Barry is an American sociologist who has several articles in the books published on the topic of human trafficking. She also co-founded the Coalition Against Trafficking in Women in the United Nations. In 1995, she wrote a book titled The Prostitution of Sexuality. In her book, she argues that there is no legal approach to prostitution that isn't abusive and doesn't exploit women. Barry's main points of the argument is extremely clear. She feels that there is no such thing as voluntary prostitution and all forms of sex work are forced, and on some level, if not on the surface. By illustrating that prostitute's word cannot be taken, even if they say they willingly choose this profession, she has unwittingly silenced the voice of the sex workers themselves. She highlights in details the issues of forced sex labor and the laws that are skewed towards male patrons, however does not take into account anything of what the women who are living this lifestyle have to say. Now I'll cover my second main point, which is the treatment of sex workers is a human rights issue. The Oxford English Dictionary defines human rights as a right that is believed to belong justifiably to everybody. The mob was controlling sex work in Las Vegas, and some of their common practices were working without pay, which is slavery. They were raped by their handlers and johns, taking women's children in order to force them to work, forcing children as young as 9 years old to engage in sexual acts. One of the most repulsive effects of leaving sex work in the hands of criminals is human trafficking. In an article written by Weisberg Kelly titled Children of the Night, it explains that children all over this country are being kidnapped, moved far from their home, and forced into prostitution. These children were beaten and tortured, threatened with death of family members if they wanted to run away or escape, forced into drug addiction. These women have nowhere to run, and according to an article written by Kathy Reisenwitz titled Why It's Time to Legalize Prostitution, 30% of the sex work abuse that prostitutes encounter are by the police themselves. These are just some of the examples that people are forced to endure. These atrocities are crimes against humanity and must be considered a human rights issue. Now let's take a look at how other countries have dealt with this issue. Reisenwitz explains that after Germany and New Zealand legalized sex work, violence against prostitutes dramatically decreased. In fact, due to health and safety laws and the ability to take credit cards, the violence was almost entirely eliminated. The data that was collected in these two countries showed that the decriminalization of prostitution has lowered the spread of STDs in these countries as a whole. One of the largest human rights groups in the world, Amnesty International, issued a statement. Amnesty International is opposed to the criminalization or punishment of activities related to buying or selling of consensual sex between adults. Criminalization discourages sex workers from reporting suspected sex trafficking to police. Now that we can clearly see how illegal prostitution, 1, leads to the empowerment of criminals, 2, is a human rights issue, and 3, how other countries' decriminalization of sex work has benefited them as a whole, it's clear that something needs to be done in this country in the way that we handle sex workers, which is why I encourage you to write to your local townships addressing that clear human rights trafficking is going on in our own backyard, and we urge them to regulate sex work and take it out of the hands of criminals. The opposition to decriminalization of sex work is mostly based on the stigma of sex for money in this country. These ideals are strongly upheld mostly due to religious morality. We must understand that sex workers are our daughters, sisters, mothers, brothers, and fathers. They ride on our buses, eat in our restaurants, and they read in our libraries. As human beings, they deserve protection under the law, and our community at large will benefit from this.